What's going on? Yeah, that's pretty much. We could start it off with just staring at it for a few seconds. I'm just saying, though, we do have. I don't know if we have enough graphics cards in here before we start the show.
We could go get some more.
If we could get just a couple of more because we're trying to take this
we
seriously.
bring in like a 952 and a 960 and a 980 Ti.
You want to make a graphics card sculpture of some
It's like the most boring show and tell ever, if that's what it is. Like, if you're going to school. All right, we are ready to go. Hello, everyone. This is Close to the Metal, our weekly computing show where we go in depth with different issues and components of computing. And today we are going to be talking about the live review of the GTX 1050 Ti from Nvidia. And we want to hear your questions. So if you're watching live right now on YouTube, go ahead and hop in there. Let us know what you want to talk about. We're going to kind of walk through the review, go through some issues with it, go through some benchmarks, let you know if you should buy it. But like I said, we do want to take your questions too. So go ahead and hop in there and let us know. If you're listening via podcast, you can always send them in afterward, and we will make sure we get to those. So the embargo on this just came out today. This brand new review for this card. Sounds like it's available somewhere, but we're going to get into that with the guys. I'm your host, Greg Nibbler. To my right,
Brad Burke.
And
Matt Smith.
You look very judgmental right now, like you're judging me.
I'm always judging.
I figure that you're always judging somebody.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the review. So, Brad, you just put up this review. Just came up this morning.
Yep.
On the GTX 1050. So maybe we'll start with you here and kind of go through this and tell us about what we've got here today.
So we actually have 4 versions of the card. Nvidia didn't do any reference founders editions with these, so it's all add-in board partners. We got 2 MSIs, a Zotac, and a Gigabyte. In varying price points and overclocks and designs, like this Gigabyte's kind of got a backplate and everything. And 2 of them are 1050s and 2 of them are 1050 Ti's.
Okay.
So we've actually got 2 different but very similar cards, which is kind of an odd thing because normally these cards, they'll put out a 1050 and then 6 months, a year down the road, they'll put out the 1050 Ti or, like we saw the 980. The 980 was around for quite some time before the 980 Ti came out. And instead they've released like all of them at the same time, for whatever reason.
So they decided to just drop them all out
right
at the same time.
Yeah. So it's 2 new cards. As far as like scores go, they perform. Oh shoot, my thing stopped loading here. They perform well. For the price point, they're pretty comparable. I mean, we can go into just some scores too.
Yeah, we can go into each thing individually on it too. I guess to start off, my question would be, what's the difference here between the 1050 and the 1050 Ti?
About $30, $40.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's let me pull up the spec sheet here. It's they're really similar. The Ti has 1 more streaming multiprocessor, up from 5 to 6.
Okay.
It also has more CUDA cores, but at a lower clock rate than the 1050. The Ti has a lower clock rate than 1050 Ti.
Okay.
There's also a difference in RAM, I believe.
Yeah, you get 2 gigs in the 1050 and 4 in the 1050 Ti.
Which I think there's probably going to be 4 gig 1050s, but on a base level you get double the memory, which I mean may or may not actually matter, but hey, it's a bigger number. But
it is a bigger number. That is always important. So that's what you're getting with that. Okay, so what is the target with this? What are they shooting for with this, with the 1050? Like, what kind of market are we looking at?
I mean, they're trying to target this sub $200 price point. Nvidia already has these, the 1060, 1070, 1080 start at 200, 250 and go up from there. And AMD has already worked the opposite direction where they started at 200 and pushed down. And so now AMD is coming in to try and compete at that price point. And there's a good precedent for that. We've talked a lot before about the 750 Ti, which came out in 2014, right? And it was a small card like these, so it doesn't require any external power. It fits into a smaller case. And in a lot of cases, you can actually just put one of these into a pre-built system, which is a big appeal, that you bought that like Dell without a graphics card and you can just slam one of these in. And unlike a heftier card like the RX 480, which requires dedicated power and more of it, one of these might be able to run off that 300, 450 watt power supply you've already got.
Okay, so that's definitely an advantage that you don't have to worry about having that external in there.
Yeah, that's definitely part of NVIDIA's pitch is that, one of these cards, the Gigabyte, does have external power that enable better overclocking, but generally speaking, these cards don't have an external power connection. So that just makes everything about it simpler. You don't need a very big power supply. I think the exact figure was like 330 watt recommendation. and you don't need a PCI Express power connector on that power supply, which if you had something like, a basic Dell, like you probably don't have that on your power supply at all. In which case, if you wanted to get a decent video card, a lot of times that would mean also buying a power supply.
Yeah,
and if you bought a power supply, then if you have to do that, that just dramatically complicates the entire thing, because now you have to disconnect everything in your computer from power, put it in a new power supply, and that most people just, if
buy a new computer.
You just don't want to do that. Like, especially if you're buying, an inexpensive video card and maybe you're looking to just play games that respectable,
like casual gaming, just
performance. So it just is supposed to simplify the entire matter and give a nice entry level video card.
That does sound like it definitely streamlines the process as far as being able to do that and make an upgrade without having to have complete knowledge of everything that goes on in your computer, like Brad would be able to do. Like you would easily be able to take that apart and do that as you claim you always do. But this would be nice.
As he claimed.
We
haven't seen evidence.
Proof. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
It would be a pain though to like rewire the power supply into a computer. That would be kind of
it's always a pain. Yeah, especially something like a pre-built Dell. Like oftentimes they have their own special connections, or just like it's just a bad power supply. It's like
yeah. Well, let's get into this and get into the details of it a little bit more here as well. We do want to take your questions, so go ahead and put those in there. We have one from John that says, so would it be competing with the RX 460? Is that the level that we're at?
Yeah, so we will get to
460?
that, but yeah,
Okay.
I would say the 1050 is sort of the rival to the 460, and the 1050 Ti is closer to the 470.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and get into some performance figures.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the benchmarks, where we're at with this. So again, we're reviewing the Nvidia GeForce GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti. So we've got them both here, and we do want to take your questions, so go ahead and drop those in there. So yeah, let's talk about performance-wise, what we're looking at here, some benchmarks.
As far as synthetic benchmarks go, I think the one that most people are going to be familiar with is Firestrike. And so these scored, the 1050 scored about 6,300 and change, where the 1050 Ti, the MSI one, was about just short of 7,000, and the Gigabyte one was at about 7,250. And so those numbers kind of, it's hard to make much out of them just on their own. But when you compare it to the RX 470, that got 9,215, and the RX 460 got 5,428. So that kind of gives you an idea that these sort of fall between those two cards.
So you're looking at about a 15% increase in power, or in the 1050 over the RX 460.
Okay, so 50% difference that you're...
Yeah, 50% better, generally speaking. And it should be noted that the RX 460 that we reviewed was not a base model. It was a version from Sapphire that had 4 gigabytes. Yeah, hold those both up here.
Yeah, if you're watching right now, you can see. And
if you're not watching, basically the 1050 is about 2/3 the size. And it doesn't have the external power connector, which that Sapphire one does. So that RX 460 that we tested was a pretty fine example of the breed. Like it was a very high end variant that was $140 MSRP, and the 1050s we tested are $110 MSRP. So that's pretty impressive that this card got 15% better than the RX 460 and Firestrike.
And still coming at that lower price point.
Yeah. So the RX 460 base price point is $100 now. But
did they drop it just to try to compete with this?
Yeah, but compared, if you get one of those base ones compared to the RX 460 we reviewed, it has half as much memory, lower clock speed. So you would expect it to be, a little bit slower than what we actually have on our benchmarks.
Okay, so that definitely makes a big difference on it. So with these different versions that we have, what are we looking at with the different versions, the different manufacturers that are putting out these?
So the highest overclock is going to be this Gigabyte right here, which is actually, like I said, it has more cores at a lower clock speed, and they've actually overclocked them to the stock speeds of the regular 1050. So they've bumped it up by a pretty decent margin. And including that, they've also thrown on a backplate. This is sort of this version would be like the RX 460 we've got. It's
okay, so this is like the premium version.
Version, and this actually carries a price premium too. It's $170 instead of $140. But you do get You get more connections here. You get extra HDMI ports, which I think is nice. The fans also stop when they don't need to run, unlike these other ones. And it has RGB LEDs on the side because,
Well, everybody's
everybody's got to have lights now.
Bells and whistles.
Gotta have
including
a
on
party.
your graphics
Bells
card,
and whistles.
where you often won't be able to see them, but that's
I was
fine.
gonna say, yeah, if that's really what you're going for.
Yeah.
You can paint flames on it or something, then you can really be cool. So, I mean, I guess my question with that is, if the GTX 1050, like this souped up version is 170, is that worth it to go for that though? If you can just upgrade for a little bit more and get a higher end graphics card.
So this is where things start to get a little murky because you might walk into a Fry's or something with $100 and you might want to put a new graphics card in your computer and you could buy one of these, not that one, but one of these 1050s.
Yeah.
Or you might buy an RX 460, but you can totally do that. But when you start getting closer to $200, your options really open up. So you also are competing at $170. This Sapphire RX 470 is only $190. So you have
it was 180 when I checked this morning.
Is it 180 now?
So
this is
even
one of the
less
ones that
expensive.
dropped.
So
This one's also
virtually the same price.
They're virtually the same price, and this one's also got a back plate. It's got extra display ports on the back. It's reference design, but I don't think that'll bother most people. So you really do have a lot of options. But the thing is, at that price point, this card really outperforms the 1050 Ti.
So you might as well just go the extra $10, $20, whatever the difference is.
I think one of the things that I tell people when they're looking at building a computer is often to choose a family of graphics cards. To say
Okay.
I really want is like a 1050 Ti, or I want like an RX 470, and then find the best deal. Just wait for that deal to come up, because you'll start seeing things like this coming down to $180, and then you have this really tough call where you have to say do I want this lower end one, its performance isn't as good, it's Nvidia, which a lot of people prefer. Things start to get really confusing there.
So your suggestion would be to figure out what you want and then be patient and look for the right price. Give it some time.
Yeah, and especially with these two, you could buy either of them, and neither of them is a really bad choice, I think, for a budget card. It's just a matter of where you're going to get the best deal and where you're going to get the best value.
Okay. Well, let's talk about actual performance if you are gaming. What can we really expect, in the real world, when you put these in here, if you're looking to up your gaming at home?
Well, Fallout 4 is always a good example. People like that game,
Great.
Somewhat. And at ultra quality, at 1080p, both the 1050s managed to get 60 frames per second or higher, 60 and 63 for the Zotac and the MSI. And then the 1050 Ti's both got 68 and 69. So you're looking at, we generally consider 60 frames per second to be ideal for 1080p gameplay. It's changing a little bit. We're starting to see more 75 hertz monitors, but that tends to be sort of the baseline. And all these cards do quite well to hit that. Battlefield 1 just came out, 50 on the 1050s and 60 on the 1050 Ti's, which is not bad. Again, that's at ultra settings. That's with all the settings cranked up,
as high as you can.
So
possibly
you
go.
can turn that down to high, and you'll get above 60 with both of them. These are cards that are going to play newer games at decent quality at 1080p. I wouldn't try and take them to 1440p unless you're playing real casual games or you don't mind really chalking those settings down. But
to give an example of a game where they didn't perform so well, Deus Ex Mankind Divided at 1080p ultra quality without anti-aliasing on, the 1050 got 18 frames per second.
Okay.
And the 1050 Ti got 23 frames per second.
So definitely not ideal right there.
No,
Yeah.
that's so that game is one of the most demanding ones that we have. It is the most demanding one I think we have tested recently. It's something that's up there around the old Crysis 3 levels of demanding. And so if you were looking at something like that game and you wanted to play it at very high detail, then this wouldn't really be the card to do it. Now, you could bump it down the medium and be okay, so you could definitely play that game.
Yeah, but if that's what you're going
But you're
for,
you have to just be realistic about what you're expecting because, like we said with Battlefield 1, which is a very popular game, you can run it at ultra, and it's not quite 60 frames per second, but I think that you would enjoy the experience. You'd have a good time with that game. And that's pretty impressive when you think about it, because that's going to look better than on consoles. It's going to be running very smoothly, and you paid $110 for this video card. Not bad, but there are limits, and you get up to the really most detailed games. This card isn't.
It's not going to cut it.
It's not going to handle it. So.
Yeah, it's not. You're going to want to go ahead and go with the upgrade, and go to a higher level
for sure. But for a lot of day-to-day gaming sort of stuff, you have to think that a lot of people out there are playing like League of Legends or World of Warcraft or something like that. In which case, these cards are going to be perfectly.
So if you're a casual gaming, if you're not looking for the very high end experience, it actually sounds like a really, really good deal to jump into it.
And the marketing term that's been thrown around lately is the esports gamer. These are targeted
that is
esports.
That is the thing.
Which is really kind of silly because what is esports? Well, it's like any game that you play competitively. So that could be like, anything from like speedrunners to like Overwatch. And, we didn't test Overwatch on these. I'm sure they play it fine. But, it is just sort of this thing where they're like, well, it's for, playing League of Legends and Dota and esports games. You know what we mean. And
the esports game thing is funny because esports gamers in particular,
just latched onto.
They just esports gamers actually they want really high frame rates on monitors with really high refresh rates because that increases the response time, makes it as smooth as possible. You get most responsive experience possible. And, these are not the cards for that.
Yeah.
I mean, they've latched onto it because a lot of these esports games are, easy to run.
I feel like there's a lot of people what they're talking about when they say it, but oh yeah, no, I'm into esports, and then they'll go.
Yeah, that's the thing about
I play my
about marketing, especially on the low end video cards, is a lot of times these are targeting people that they are particularly targeting people that don't know a ton about the hardware. People who are really into it usually spring for something that's a little more expensive. So, these things are kind of trying to hook people in, being like, hey, you heard of that League of Legends? This'll play it. And people be like, oh my god, wow, I don't play the League of Legends? That's amazing. I know my computer from 5 years ago can't do that, so, it works. But I say everyday performance is actually pretty good for the price, for sure.
Okay. It's being asked here in the chat. I'll take some more questions too, so go ahead and put those in there, and we'll ask guys this: could people stream with this card?
Sure. I mean, streaming is more CPU, tends to be more CPU bound.
I don't know. I think it would depend.
Depends on. I don't know. At least in my experience, it's been a more CPU bound experience because it's more just that you have to play the game, and then you also have to run the encoding software and the uploading software to do it.
I wouldn't recommend it.
You wouldn't recommend streaming on it, Brad?
But if you're streaming for Twitch or something, I assume that's what you mean.
But the quality would not be there for you. You wouldn't want to.
Oh, I would be worried about whether or not the performance would hold up.
Okay, but Brad, you think that it would? Why do you think this would hold up?
I just think it's, like I said, I think if you are running it maybe with an i3, which is, likely to be the chip that you would pair with the system would be like an i3 or an i5, then maybe you are going to have trouble. But I think if you had a high-end system and you wanted to throw this in there, like a nice CPU-heavy system, and you wanted to throw one of these in there and play a little bit of games and stream them, I don't think you'd have an issue. I don't know if you'd want it as your permanent, streaming setup, but...
Okay. All right. So you're saying you would do it,
it could be done.
Maybe not necessarily the high end. Matt is saying no. So there's the answer on that. I don't know if that actually answered your streaming question or not, but you can. Maybe not preferable. So we do want to take some more questions in here. Whatever you guys want. I'm seeing a couple more here that we're going to get to. Yeah, the big debate right now in the chat. If you're listening via podcast, Brad has an unnamed white beverage in front of him.
That commenter is right. It's milk water. It's just a combination of milk and water.
Brad and his milk water every morning.
The problem I have with milk is it's too strong. You gotta dilute it.
You gotta dilute that down. All right. Now that we've settled the hot button issues, we do have, if you have any more questions, please drop those in there and we'll get to those. It's being asked, how close is the GTX 1050 Ti to the 970? And I know we kind of covered that a little bit doing the comparisons earlier, but yeah, let's see.
1050 Ti. So we didn't test the 970 in this performance roundup, but the 970 is generally hovering around somewhere around the GTX 1060, and we did test the 1060.
Okay.
So using that as a stand-in, it looks like that in Firestrike, the 1050 Ti. Just give me 1 second to do
Okay.
a
We're all
little
both just, like,
calculator
furiously looking
magic
at-
right here.
Furiously typing over there.
Looks like about a 30% difference, maybe
Okay.
more, in performance. So that's pretty substantial. And by that, that's to the favor of the 1060 versus the 1050 Ti. So
Okay.
if you've got a 970, if you're asking if you got a 970,
Yeah, compared to
this
that.
would be a pretty substantial downgrade from that.
Yeah, and especially I have Firestrike scores for the 970. Whoa, they just disappeared. 9589, which is pretty equivalent to the 9215 we got for the RX 470. So the 970 and the 470 are actually
Yeah,
pretty
and
evenly
that's
matched.
about $2,000 over what the fastest 1050 Ti we tested got. So yeah, 970 is going to be a fair bit faster than any
Okay.
of these GTX 1050 variants.
What are we talking about price difference between those two?
Oh, I mean, that's sort of a tough question anymore because the 970 is an outdated card. I'd assume
Yeah.
he probably already has the card
And
and
he
is
would
wondering if he should if this would be an upgrade of some kind.
Right.
And it wouldn't be because the 970 is going out of date. Its pricing, it's like the fluctuations are getting starting to get kind of weird.
I am seeing 960 or 970s as low as $200. So
Really, still in stock. So like if you were like comparing those two cards side by side to buy one, then I guess you would get the 970. I mean,
Yeah. But you
they're
would
not
not
really
recommend that,
comparable.
though. No.
Like the 1050, even the Ti is like targeting a lower level of performance.
Couple of questions. We'll get to both of these here that are in the live chat right now. So somebody said, I thought Nvidia said this could run VR. Could these cards run VR?
no.
No. No,
They
no.
actually
Oh,
did not. Well, here's the thing. Okay,
'Kay.
so here's exactly what they said on the press call. They said we do not have any official certification from like Oculus saying this is VR ready. We think that it could meet the minimum specification now that they have lowered it because they lowered the minimum to GTX 960.
Okay.
which
And-
was part of this happened at Oculus Connect, and the thing about that is
Yeah.
that it uses what they call asynchronous space warp, which is like I actually do love Oculus terms because they sound really futuristic.
It does, yeah.
But space warp basically allows you to like intersperse your real frames with in between rendered frames, so you can actually run games at 45 frames per second and double that with some calculations that are making sure that things stay rotated and moving correctly. And the result is that you can play games. There is now basically an Oculus recommended spec and a minimum spec.
Yeah.
But if you were going to go with a full VR system, wouldn't you just want to upgrade a little bit more? I mean, you're already
Yes.
putting in the money for that.
If you're
kind of a
spending
system.
like $600 to $800 on a VR headset, then
Yeah.
spending an extra $80 to get something like a GTX 1060 or RX 480 would be greatly recommended. These cards theoretically can probably run some VR stuff, because especially on the Vive, a lot of those games are not really that demanding. They're not that graphically amazing, but it's not the first choice. Kind of like the streaming thing. It's not probably can do it, but it's probably not the first choice.
Yeah, not recommended. If you're going to spend that much money,
Yeah.
go a little bit higher
Yeah.
and go there. But this is a nice card just if you're looking for casual gaming, as we were talking about. Definitely an easy plug-and-play kind of option right there, especially for somebody. If you're not ready to take apart your entire computer and rebuild it from scratch, this is something you could do that you could plug in and actually get some pretty good play out of it. A couple of more questions that we've got coming in here, and go ahead and put those in because we'll get to those before we end here in just a couple of minutes. So we've got just the basic question: what brands of graphic cards would you guys recommend on getting? I guess he's talking about brand.
Yeah, I would assume he means like
MSI,
add-in board
Sapphire.
partner.
Yeah. Any
it's
specific?
It's a tough one to recommend specifics because they all, I don't know, they're all pretty good. I've been happy with Asus cards that
Yeah.
I've personally purchased and EVGA cards, but also Zotac tends to have a lot of smaller cards that do very well. So if you're looking for something a little bit smaller, that's oftentimes a good direction to go. So, but if you're talking about performance, these are all going to perform pretty much. They're going to perform the same. They got the same GPU in them. If you're talking about reliability, you know what? Like, the truth is, no one really knows how reliable these cards are. Consumer Reports has never done a test comparing the reliability of, video cards. And you would really have to, like, sample thousands of users to find that out. It's never been done. So, unfortunately, you just kind of got to buy whatever you think is, the best and the lowest price. Like Brad had said, pricing is important.
But at that point, wouldn't you think, though, if a brand was really underperforming, that would have come out by now, just in general, of their products?
Or yeah, no? I mean, again, like, they're not the ones. All they're doing is they're getting this board, and in some cases, they're putting a new back plate on it, or a new, like, an input-output plate, and they're throwing a cooler on there.
Or some LED lights.
You could literally, like, take the cooler off of this one and swap them, and they'd be pretty similar except for the overclock. I will say we do see noticeable performance benefits from overclocking. So if you have an option between a non-overclocked version and an overclocked version, especially at the same price, the overclock tends to help. It tends to provide a little frame rate bump, a little synthetic benchmark bump. As far as brands, I like Sapphire. I've had a couple Sapphire cards. Seem fine to me. And then just as a side note, if you want to put liquid cooling on your card, which you probably wouldn't do with like a 1050, EVGA, you don't void the warranty if you pull your cooler off.
For EVGA, you do not.
EVGA, you do not.
But the other ones, you would.
I'm not sure on the other brands. I just know specifically that EVGA does allow you to pull your cooler off and put on your own solution and still covered with warranty. So.
Okay. All right. And as we're kind of going through this, again, we're reviewing the GTX 1050 Ti and then kind of taking your questions, whatever you want, as we go through the last few minutes here of the show. So go ahead and drop those in there into YouTube, and I'll make sure we get to those. I guess let's talk about that. What you guys, we talked about what brands you prefer. What do you guys look for when you go out to buy a card? Like, say you're going to buy this level of one. What are the key things that somebody should look for when they go out and they're looking online? Like components or like what do you look for like right off the bat?
Like in general when you're looking for a graphics card?
Yeah, or maybe specifically this one.
This one?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to be really drawn to this type of card more. The short with the 1050s and the 1050i.
So just the size.
The size, because like we were saying, like this one's a really nice card. It's got a lot of nice features, but its price premium puts it in competition with some really high-end cards like the RX 470 and the 480. Whereas this really fits a specific role in that it fits into a small system, it fits into a pre-built system, it goes into a system without a good power supply. And it will, like, if you have just like an i5 pre-built system, this will let you play some games. Like, all of a sudden that that integrated graphics chip is going to get blown out of the water by any of these. And I think that's, if I were looking for a 1050 or 1050 Ti, I would probably go with a stronger overclocked small version, small footprint.
So those are the two things you would look for right off the bat. Yeah. Matt, what about you?
I would probably just go with one of these basic $110 ones.
So you go on price
and
more
buy
than
whatever is least expensive. If you get a deal on one that's like $100 in a few months or something, that would be great.
So regardless of brand and whether it's overclocked.
Yeah, I mean the thing about these cards is they're really inexpensive, and you're getting them for pretty bare bones level performance, and there's all these different add-ons you do, including overclocking, and they all have their own marginal benefit. But ultimately, I think if you're buying a card like this, you're just saying to yourself, I want to play some games. I can't spend a lot of money, or my computer doesn't support bigger graphics cards. So what can I get? And these are the factors on, I guess, kind of rounding it out, like, should you buy one? And if you're in that position, then I think you really should just, buy on price, because as you try and add on other things or other considerations, it gets both more complicated and also pricier, which puts you closer to those actual cards that are mid-range and quite a bit quicker.
That require external power.
So, yeah, I'd just go basic on something like this, and that can be a pretty good upgrade plan, too, because these kind of cards are going to be out of date quickly. Like, in 2-3 years, something like this is going to be struggling pretty much with the latest games.
But at $100,
because it's $100, you can just sort of rotate that out, and I know that's appealing to some people because, you can do that and say, well, I can just play the latest games at respectable frame rates for $100 every few years, rather than paying $300, $400, $500 every few years to get, the like maximum detail. So
right, which will still be outdated in 3 to 4
but
years. Anyway.
long story short, I'd go basic with something like this.
Okay.
It's also nice that these cards came out at the price they were supposed to. Something we talked about before is that pricing for these cards tends to be high. Like when the 1080 and 1070 came out, it was crazy. People were charging $1,000 in the resale market for 1080s, just jacking up the price. And we've seen already that some of these are available at $110.
Yeah.
You could buy one on Newegg,
Well, it seems like they've actually put out enough for the market demand, which is, like you said, not necessarily a normal thing.
Yeah, I think these are benefiting from the fact that they're using the same sort of architecture as all those other cards we talked about, the GTX 1060, 1070, 1080 that had already been out for a while.
Yeah.
And so at this point, probably the supply line's a little bit better shape. So hopefully, it's possible that, later today they'll all be sold out and they won't be anymore for a month. So hopefully that won't happen. But right now, we do see that they are available.
So if you want one, go get one right now. That's basically what you're saying. Last question here, just because I said I would get this in. Have you guys tried an overclock on the cards without a 6-pin connector?
We haven't. There's a little bit of an overclock on the MSI, but it's pretty slight, I think. You can probably get a little bit out of them, I would guess. We don't usually try and overclock GPUs, but
not
we have
for
4,
our
so maybe we'll give it a shot.
I think this MSI 10 actually weren't both the MSIs overclocked?
Yeah, both the MSIs are overclocked.
And which one's the 1050?
It says TI on the bracket here, so you can tell the difference.
Oh, yeah, it's in marker. So this one doesn't have a 6-pin,
Thank you for doing that, by the way, MSI.
This doesn't have a 6-pin, this MSI. And this was overclocked actually within like 20 megahertz of the gigabyte, wasn't it?
Yeah, the MSI, the 1050 is bumped from 1354 base to 1405 and boost from 1455 to 1519. So that's like a pretty moderate overclock. And then the TI is actually quite overclocked because that's overclocked to 1354 and 1454, which are the base clock or the stock speeds for the 1050.
And there's no external power on that overclocked MSI. So yeah, apparently you can get some overclock from it. If you're some sort of extreme overclocker, it's probably not going to be enough. But in that case, again, I don't know why you would be buying this particular card.
Right, just go up a little bit higher.
Yeah, it does look like there's probably a little bit of headroom.
Okay. All right, well, there we go. Any final thoughts on this review on the GTX 1050? Would you, we've covered kind of would you buy it, a lot of different things on it. Brad, final thoughts, because it is your review, which you can see at digitaltrends.com.
I still think, I think these cards, like Matt was saying, like if you want to spend $100, you can just buy one of these. The 1050 Ti's position is a little less clear to me.
Okay.
It's harder to imagine a situation where you need that small size and you don't. Because you can get mini size cards of like the 970. You can get like a 1060 mini. I don't actually know if those are out yet, but they probably are. These are the 1050 is a really budget friendly card, and maybe the 1050 Ti will be someday too.
But right now, you would go 1050.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about the 1050 is that it clearly defeats its AMD competitor in our testing. Whereas the 1050 Ti and the closer to RX 470 prices that it's at, it's a little bit more, You
might just go with the RX 470 over the TI.
Yeah. I think that the 1050 is in a lot better matchup. So clearly, if you're spending like low hundreds, that's the one to get. 1050 Ti. It's more, you have to check out the individual deals and see what's going on there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think there we go. That's the show for today. So thanks for tuning in. This is Close to the Metal. So we do the show every Wednesday at 10 a.m. And you can tune in, let us know your questions. We cover different aspects of computing. We got a lot of back episodes that you can watch too or listen to via podcast. If you want to hear the audio version, it's on iTunes and Stitcher, wherever you get podcasts. We've got that there. And if you're watching in hindsight, and you want to put down some questions, go ahead and drop them in there, and we'll make sure that we get to those as well. So thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Send us an email, podcast@digitaltrends.com, and check out the full review on the website right now at digitaltrends.com. You can read everything about it and kind of go in detail. If there's maybe some things that we didn't cover that you wanted to see, you can probably find that right there. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another episode. Bye.